Let's start with MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid reporting from Dubai, our White House reporter Akayla Gardner, former Pentagon and State Department official Elisa Ewers of the Council on Foreign Relations, and former Undersecretary of the Army during the Trump's first term, retired Navy Admiral Jim McPherson. Thanks to you all. Inzamam, to you first. This clock is ticking. The threats are escalating from the president. What is the status right now?
Yeah, we're 10 hours away from President Trump's deadline, his ultimatum, and whilst there is some hope of a potential ceasefire peace agreement being reached, that hope is diminishing pretty rapidly, it's fair to say. Laura, we started off today with some positive notes, hearing from the Iranian ambassador inside Pakistan. He said that Pakistan positive and productive endeavors in goodwill and good office to stop the war is approaching a critical, sensitive stage. Stay tuned for more. That felt pretty optimistic. And then throughout the day today, we've just constantly seen messages coming through from the president, now hearing from Vice President J.D. Vance, and also some of the conversations that I've been having directly with the Pakistanis. Remember, these are playing the mediator role. These are essentially the guys who are handing the messages between the US and Iran, working alongside Turkey and Egypt to come up with this framework, which they put to the US and Iran to essentially get a ceasefire, to stop the fighting and also open up the Strait of Hormuz so that oil could pass through. But today, they're feeling pretty optimistic. One Pakistan government official who's close to the peace talks that I've been speaking to, he didn't want to share his identity given the sensitivities of these talks. He said to me that whilst the talks between US and Iran are ongoing, there is no hope anything will be confirmed today following US-Israeli attacks on Iran and Iranian attacks inside the Gulf states. It's looking very unlikely, but Pakistan continues to try for peace and stability in the region. Qatar also coming out today and suggesting that we are close to the point where the situation in the region could spiral out of control. And then, as I mentioned, Vice President J.D. Vance was speaking in Hungary. I just want to quickly pick up on his comments. I'm sure Akayla will shortly too. But he's very much said that right now the ball remains in Iran's court. He said that they're not the fastest of negotiators, but it's up to them how the next 10 hours go. I think what's incredibly important is that things are escalating in terms of the rhetoric, but also actual attacks as well, Laura. We see right throughout this region that the fighting very much continues, and how that goes in hand with any peace talks is the big question.
A deal seems like it still is very elusive. Inzamam, thank you. Admiral, a deal is elusive. While the president is also escalating his attacks, we just read that the president is essentially threatening to annihilate an entire population. And I want to revisit this exchange yesterday when a New York Times reporter confronted Trump about the prospect of violating international law. Take a listen.
Deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure violate the Geneva Conventions and international law.
Who are you with?
I'm with the New York Times. Zolan from the New York Times. Are you
failing?
Are you concerned?
Circulation way down at the New York Times.
Are you concerned that your threat to bomb power plants and bridges amount to
no, not at all. No, I'm not. I hope I don't have to do it.
Admiral, you heard the president. No, not at all. He's not concerned. When you hear all of this from President Trump, when you hear Secretary Hegseth say no quarter, no mercy, and Trump threatening to send Iran back to the Stone Ages, does this sound like an administration that has thrown out the rule book?
With each passing day and announcement that they make, they more and more confirm that we have indeed perhaps committed war crimes. I think it's important to note that the Geneva Conventions prevents us from targeting civilian infrastructure like bridges, like roadways, like hospitals, like schools, and yet it seems that we are doing just that. I think what we need to remember is that there are certain provisions of the Geneva Conventions that if they're violated, that's also a violation of United States Code, our own law, and can be prosecuted in federal district courts. And by the way, there's no statute of limitation on those war crimes. It will continue to go into the next administration.
Admiral, you served in the first Trump administration as Undersecretary of the Army. You're also a former Navy lawyer. What advice do you think the president needs to hear right now? And do you think that he's getting a real picture of the situation on the ground?
The advice I would provide is tone down the rhetoric, because the rhetoric goes into the public record, and the public record is going to be used to taint our reputation both here and abroad. As you said, words like no quarter given, the ROE is stupid, we can conduct strikes just for the fun of it. Those sorts of statements are not what our country is made of. It's not what our people expect. It's not what our soldiers need to hear.
Elisa, your reaction to President Trump's comments as well, this threat to wipe out an entire civilization tonight. What is to stop the president here? Who will stop him? What does accountability look like?
Well, it's clear he doesn't care about any of the norms or standards that we have held ourselves and the global community to for decades, right? This is a dangerous precedent that he is setting. The way he talks about Iran, the disregard for the impact that these actions and this escalation may have on 93 million people. It's beyond crude, but unfortunately, it's also par for the course. He's also disregarding that escalation is unlikely to bring down this Iranian regime, but it does put U.S. forces in the dangerous position of being of striking civilian infrastructure for sport, even if they are dual use, even if they are used by the military. It is incumbent on those who adhere to international humanitarian law to justify targeting dual use, that the military gain is worth the civilian loss, and that justification is not coming here. Who will hold him accountable? Well, the American people, if you look at polls, are deeply, deeply uncomfortable with the war. 6 in 10 Americans say the U.S. military action in Iran has gone too far. That has increasingly gotten worse over the course of the last 6 weeks. We also, of course, have Congress, who both houses are in session, but presumably will be forced to take this up when they return over the weekend and into next week. So voters are watching. They are clearly demonstrating that they do not like where this is headed, and they will make that view known.
Speaking of the American public, Akela, when the president has talked about this war that he launched, he has changed the goals and the justifications for it repeatedly. The president is now calling the Strait of Hormuz a, quote, top priority after previously saying that the U.S. would have nothing to do with it and that the strait would reopen naturally. So what's changed here, Kayla?
Well, Laura, one of my biggest takeaways from yesterday is the president was asked by a reporter whether he had seen polling about this war, and he suggested that he has. And he said Americans, and specifically his supporters, want the U.S. to win this war and come home. And that is in no small part because of the impact on people's wallets, because of the price of gas. And we've seen the U.S. go from carrying out operations to degrade Iran's ability to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz, to the president saying it's actually China and Japan and NATO allies' responsibility to take control of the strait. But the president said specifically yesterday that a part of any agreement with Iran, he wants the free traffic of oil. And I want you to take a listen to some of what he had to say.
If I had my choice, what would I like to do? Take the oil. Because it's there for the taking. There's not a thing they can do about it. Unfortunately, the American people would like to see us come home. If it were up to me, I'd take the oil, I'd keep the oil, and would make plenty of money. And I'd also take care of the people of Iran, much better than they've been taken care of. If I had my choice, I'd keep the oil. But I also want to make the people of our country happy. I think most people wouldn't understand that.
And the president was asked specifically how that would work, taking the oil. And he brought up Venezuela as an example. He said, I'm a businessman. He's certainly seeming to try to get an arrangement similar to that of which he has with Delcy Rodriguez to sort of profit off of oil sales. But there's no sign that Iran would agree to anything like that. But one question I had today was Vice President Vance is in Hungary. He's been a key part of negotiations, and the White House is saying that he continues to be a part of those negotiations that are a collaborative effort with him, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and they're also naming Secretary Rubio, who the president hasn't really mentioned before, as a part of his key and core team. Laura?
Alyssa, we only have 10 hours left right now. Iran has already rejected a couple of proposals. What is happening, based on your experience, in those back rooms negotiating under this fast approaching deadline? Is there still time for a breakthrough?
Well, both sides came into this with maximalist positions, and the mediators have been working hard, but those gaps have still persisted, right? Iran wants to use its leverage for a long-term solution. The United States obviously wanting concessions on the Strait up front. So these positions are kind of incompatible. Mediators are trying to close those gaps, probably buying for more time, hoping that the deadline tonight can be pushed back. What we heard at the top of the segment is that there is really very little hope that they can get a definitive answer tonight. But they are going to keep trying until that deadline arrives to try and bridge those gaps and make this situation a little bit more compatible to an exit ramp. But both sides have a logic to cut a deal, right? The U.S. is getting mired in a war that has no exit strategy. It's a high risk of escalation, the public polling, the market reactions we've talked about. Iran is also weakened militarily. The regime has lost all credibility internally. It will be hard to recover from this existential fight. So both sides have some incentive, but the rhetoric doesn't match those objectives right now.